Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are jumping into, one of the most action-packed and just pivotal stretches in the entire book of Genesis. We're looking at chapters 18 through 20.
It's an incredible study in contrasts, really.
It is.
Yeah, if you look at the source material we've gathered, all the commentaries and Bible studies, they'll point to this. These chapters are this tight literary sequence that puts two huge realities right next to each other.
Okay, so on the one hand,
On one hand, you have God finally confirming the promise of a son to Abraham and Sarah, who are, very old. And on the other, he's revealing his plan for this spectacular judgment against Sodom.
so our mission today is really to unpack all of that, the theological lessons, the cultural details embedded in these events, and we're going to focus on that stark contrast you mentioned, Abraham's faith and generosity versus the failures of human nature.
Including Abraham's own failures, which is key.
Exactly. We want to find those nuggets of insight that show the difference between, living righteously and the really high cost of worldliness.
It's divine nature set right up against human nature.
Okay, so let's dive in. It starts with Abraham near the trees of Mamre, middle of the day, heat of the day, and it's not some grand vision, is it? It's a very humble, almost quiet visitation.
It really is. The text just opens by saying, the Lord appeared, but then it describes what Abraham sees. And what he sees are three men standing near his tent.
Three men.
Right. And commentators widely suggest that one of these figures isn't just an angel, but actually a Christophany.
A pre-incarnate appearance of Christ.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Accompanied by two angels. So it's God arriving, unexpectedly, in disguise, right at Abraham's doorstep.
And Abraham's reaction is it's immediate. It says he ran to meet them. He doesn't send a servant. He goes himself.
He runs, and then he bows low and addresses the main visitor as my Lord Adonai. That act of running for a man of his stature is just a huge sign of humility, isn't it?
It's a deliberate act of self-abasement.
It is. You have to remember the context here. Abraham is a wealthy, powerful patriarch. He's basically a regional prince. For a man like that to run to meet three dusty travelers and then bow to the ground, it sets the tone of service immediately.
And then he jumps right into that sacred duty of hospitality. First thing he offers is water for foot washing.
And foot washing is such a critical detail. In the ancient Near East, hospitality wasn't just, a nice thing to do. It was a sacred duty, partly because any guest could potentially be a messenger from God.
Right.
But the act of washing feet itself, that was almost always the job of the lowest servant. The roads were filthy, people wore open sandals. It was a menial task.
So the powerful man who runs to his guests is also offering to do the job of his lowest slave. That's the real nugget here. It's a complete reversal of the status hierarchy.
Precisely. And he follows it up with his lavish feast, even though he downplays it, just calling it a morsel of bread.
Just a little snack.
Right. But he tells Sarah to quickly make cakes from 3 seahs of the finest flour. That's about 20 pounds of high-quality flour. And he personally runs to his own herd to pick out a tender calf. He's giving them the best of what he has.
And he doesn't even eat with them. One of our sources pointed out that he stands by under the tree while they eat. He's maintaining that posture of a servant until they're satisfied.
It's Abraham living out the very righteousness and justice God wants his family to be known for. He's really the standard of virtue in this whole section.
But then, after this incredible moment of selfless hospitality, the conversation takes a very sharp turn. It becomes intensely personal and theological.
It does. The Lord asks for Sarah, and then he reconfirms the core promise of the covenant.
And this time it's specific.
Very specific. He promises she will have a son when the season comes around, basically within the year. It gives a firm timeline that's been missing for decades.
And Sarah, who's listening from the tent door, has this very human reaction. It says she laughed within herself.
And you can understand why. The text is so blunt about it. She's 90 years old, and the way of women had ceased.
So biologically impossible.
Completely. Decades of barrenness had created what you might call a protective cynicism. She's focused entirely on the natural limits. She's old, her body is old.
And the sources make a big distinction between her laugh and Abraham's laugh from a chapter earlier, don't they?
They do. Abraham's laugh was seen as, astonishment mixed with a kind of reverent awe. Sarah's private laugh, her internal thought, was seen as distrust, as unbelief in the face of the impossible.
And that's what makes God's response so powerful. He knows her private thought. He immediately turns to Abraham and asks, "Why did Sarah laugh?"
And then he asks the question, the big one. Is anything too hard for the Lord? He's the heart knower.
Wow. That rhetorical question just demolishes her entire focus on human inability. She's measuring God's power by her own aged body.
And God just turns that private skepticism into the definitive demonstration of his power and his faithfulness to the covenant. It forces everyone, Abraham, Sarah, and you, the reader, to look at his nature, not our limitations.
It's a reminder that what seems impossible for us is always possible for God.
And we do know she got there in the end. The New Testament later praises her faith, saying she judged him faithful who had promised.
A huge moment. Okay, so after this, two of the men, the two angels, they head off towards Sodom, but Abraham is still standing before the Lord. And this is where God makes this monumental decision about judgment.
He does. He decides to reveal his plan for Sodom to Abraham. He's treating him like a trusted friend of God. And the text says this was intentional so that Abraham could understand what righteousness and justice require and then teach it to his children.
So the destruction of Sodom is meant to be a warning, an object lesson for all time.
Yes, God states the reason very clearly. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave. He's giving Abraham the justification for what's about to happen.
And that's the moment Abraham shifts from being a gracious host to, well, a bold intercessor. He starts this back and forth with God.
But he appeals entirely on the basis of God's own character, his perfect justice. He asks that incredible question, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked?
And then he says, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? I mean, that is such a bold thing to say to God. Is he negotiating or is he testing?
The sources call it bold humility. He isn't questioning God's power. He's appealing to God's own self-revealed character as a just and righteous judge.
And the negotiation that follows from 50 righteous people all the way down to 10, that's him just pressing that point.
It seems his motivation was mainly for his nephew, Lot, who was living there. He's haggling God down 50, 45, 40.
And God agrees every single time. He'll spare the whole city for the sake of that righteous minority all the way down to 10.
Which establishes a vital theological principle, right? God will not judge the innocent with the wicked. And a godly minority can play this powerful, delaying role against judgment. Abraham stops at 10, probably because he just can't imagine that Lot's household doesn't have at least 10 righteous people in it.
It's a powerful idea that a righteous few can act as a preservative in a corrupt world.
Exactly. But as we see what happens next, well, it shows why that negotiation stopped short.
We just saw Abraham offer his best calf and his personal service. Now we get the absolute inverse, the total collapse of hospitality in Sodom.
The two angels arrive, and where do they find Lot? Sitting at the city gate. Which probably means he'd become pretty integrated into the community, maybe even held a position like a judge or an elder.
He still shows them hospitality, though. He invites them in, knowing it's dangerous for them to be in the public square.
He does. But before they can even get settled, the depravity of the city just erupts.
The men of Sodom surround the house, and the text makes it clear it was all the people from every quarter, both old and young.
The entire male population. And they're demanding the visitors be brought out for wholesale sexual abuse. It is this terrifying communal expression of wickedness that has completely replaced any virtue.
And Lot's response to this mob, I mean, the sources call it an incomprehensible negotiation.
It is utterly shocking. In this confused attempt to protect his guests, which is the sacred duty, he completely compromises. He offers his 2 virgin daughters to the mob instead.
It's a tragic picture of how his moral compass had been completely warped by his environment.
He'd absorbed the culture. He was willing to sacrifice his own family to protect his reputation as a good host, a catastrophic distortion of priorities.
So it's the angels who have to step in. They pull Lot inside and strike the mob with blindness. But even then, even after seeing that divine power, Lot still struggles to leave.
He lingered. That's the word the text uses, and it's the ultimate symbol of the price of worldliness. He has such a hard time leaving his house, his possessions. He's clinging to the comforts of this doomed world.
So the angels have to physically grab him?
By God's mercy, yes. They literally take his hand and his wife's and his 2 daughters and lead them out of the city.
And the destruction that follows is total. The Lord rained brimstone and fire out of the heavens. This wasn't a natural disaster.
No. And the fate of Lot's wife just seals the lesson. She looks back. Her heart was still in Sodom, and she becomes a pillar of salt, this permanent, fatal example of disobedience. The fact that only 4 people were rescued shows that the 10 righteous people Abraham hoped for just weren't there.
And the moral corrosion of Sodom doesn't end at the city limits, does it? The downward spiral for Lot's family isn't over.
Not at all. Lot becomes afraid and moves his family into a cave. And his daughters, who were raised in that toxic moral environment, they come up with a plan. They believe they have to commit incest with their father to preserve the family lineage.
It's a terrifying look at how corrupted thinking gets passed down. And this union gives birth to the Moabites and the Ammonites, who become these historic enemies of Israel. It's a sobering reminder of how your environment can destroy even a man who was, at his core, considered righteous.
It shows that even after God rescues you physically, the moral residue can stick around and ruin your spiritual life
Uh-huh.
and your family.
And right after this tragedy, we see this really disturbing failure, but this time from Abraham himself. How does a man who just stood before God, who interceded for a whole city, repeat a massive failure from 25 years earlier?
It just highlights recurring human frailty, doesn't it?
Mm.
Abraham moves to Gerar, and out of fear, he pulls the exact same half-truth he used in Egypt. He tells King Abimelech that Sarah is his sister.
He's willing to sacrifice his wife's purity for his own safety. Again, it's a shocking lapse of faith.
But here's where it gets so interesting. The Gentile king Abimelech, he acts with more integrity than Abraham, the man of the covenant.
Absolutely. God warns Abimelech in a dream, and Abimelech, who is not a Hebrew, immediately obeys. He demonstrates a fear of God, restores Sarah, and even rebukes Abraham for the deception. It's this incredible contrast.
It shows that righteousness isn't exclusive to one lineage.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really shows God's incredible patient grace. Despite Abraham's failure, God still calls him a prophet and tells Abimelech to seek Abraham's prayers. Our weakness doesn't cancel God's promise.
That's right. The divine covenant is rooted in God's faithfulness, not in Abraham's perfect performance. He stays faithful even when Abraham is acting like a coward.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The contrast is just everywhere. Abraham's lavish humility versus Sodom's brutal depravity. Abraham's bold faith in God's promise versus his repeated personal failure in Gerar.
And that's the ultimate lesson here, I think. The core tension that holds all this together is that contrast between our human inability and God's sovereign power. It all comes back to that one question. Is anything too hard for the Lord?
Right. Abraham and Sarah were looking at their own limitations, their own bodies, their own fears.
But God forces them, and us, to look at the boundless reach of his nature. The judge of all the earth will do right, but his justice and mercy operate on a level that's way beyond our natural expectations.
And it seems like this whole sequence, the promise, the judgment, the intercession, it was all designed to teach Abraham and all his descendants how critical it is to live righteously, even when you're surrounded by a wicked world.
And, that brings us all the way back to the very first point, hospitality. The source material notes that hospitality is a profound gospel witness to the love of Christ and how he welcomes us.
How he welcomes us.
Yeah, we were the aliens, the strangers, the enemies, and yet through Christ we are welcomed into his family with this lavish, sacrificial love.
So, if God showed that kind of hospitality to us, giving his very best, like Abraham with the calf and the fine flour, what does that demand of us today when we encounter the stranger or the outsider or just someone who is different? That's the challenge this deep dive leaves you with. How does God's welcome redefine yours?